All right, we're going to get started. Thanks for coming, everybody. We are going to be talking about the Sea Grant Knauss Fellowship. At any point, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And we'll kind of go through the basics pretty quickly so that we can get to more of your questions. Just so everybody knows, the NOFO for this fellowship is available. There's a link on the Virginia Sea Grant website, which we'll throw in the chat real quick. And if at any point after this, you have any questions, feel free to email either Hillary or myself. So I'm Lisa Eddy. I'm the competitive research.
Let me go ahead and hit the record button. Let me record. Is it? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I didn't get the notice. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Anyway, I'm Lisa Eddy. I'm the competitive research and education coordinator here at Virginia Sea Grant. And Hillary, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Hillary Parmentier. I am the professional development coordinator here at Virginia Sea Grant. It's nice to see everyone.
All right, so today we're talking about the Knauss Fellowship. And for those of you who don't know or need a refresher, that's a one-year fellowship. It runs February to February in Washington, D.C. And you can be placed either in the executive or the legislative branch. It is a long application period, which we will talk about in a moment, but for the cycle that's happening right now, the applications that you will be putting in that are due to Virginia Sea Grant in February, you will be starting that fellowship. If you were awarded the fellowship, you will start in February of 2025. So when you're thinking about applying for this fellowship, when you're thinking through the logistics and your timing, keep in mind this is for the 2025 cycle. All right, so this is kind of the timeline that we're looking at for Knauss. As I said, it's a very long fellowship application window. The NOFO was released a few weeks ago, and your applications will be due to Virginia Sea Grant on February 15th, and those will be put in through eSea Grant, which you can find a link to on our website. Once we have those applications, we go through, they're reviewed in-house, we do some interviews, and then we can select 6 students to put forward to the national competition. That gets sent up in March. Those applications are reviewed nationally in June, and by June, maybe July, we find out who the finalists are and the runners-up. So you will not know if you've been selected for this fellowship if you are a Virginia finalist until next June or July. So again, just something to keep in mind. As far as the fellowship award goes, they have upped the salary stipend again. It's up to $71,400 at this point. That does cover your employer and employee FICA and your health insurance, which we will go into at great detail if you're selected as a Virginia finalist, or again, if you're selected as a national finalist. The discretionary budget, that covers travel for professional development and some relocation. And then the host office travel is kind of position specific. So again, something we'll get into a little bit more if you are selected and once we know where you're placed. And just so you know, if you are selected as a Virginia Knauss Fellow, you are technically going to be an employee of William and Mary, because that is where Virginia Sea Grant is hosted. We're at VIMS in Gloucester Point. So eligibility, any student can apply for Knauss. It's one of the few national fellowships where international students are welcome to apply as well. If you are an international student applying, please shoot us an email just so we can make sure everything's set up for you. You just have to be enrolled in a degree program, a graduate program. What we will add to that is you do have to relocate to Washington, D.C. So you should be pretty close to the end of your degree program. Virginia tends to be very competitive for Knauss fellowships just to get through the Virginia portion. And we are going to be looking at the time commitment and where you are in your degree program and making sure that it's feasible for you to get up to DC next February. Otherwise, you just need an interest in ocean, coastal, or Great Lakes resources and policy. All right, so these are a few criteria sent down from nationals that affect eligibility. Like I said, moving to DC, you must be able to pass a federal background check. And although I noted that international students are welcome to apply, there will be some host offices that will not be able to take international students. Again, just shoot us an email if this applies to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So I want to spend most of the time today kind of talking about the application. It's not a hard application, it's not a long application, but there are a very specific set of evaluation criteria that you really need to pay attention to while you're writing your application, and they are detailed in the NOFO. There's links to them on our website. So please, when you're writing, after you're done, go back and make sure you've touched on all the questions they've actually asked. Because the national review is entirely based on your paperwork. We will interview you when we're at the state review process, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, but that will not be considered if you're forwarded on to nationals. Everything will be based on the paper that you submitted. So the first thing you need is your project narrative. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reading through these charts. Mostly because they're available through the NOFO and also on the National Sea Grant website. If you do have any specific questions about them, please shoot us an email or drop a question in the chat. Make sure you're following the page limits, the word counts, things of that nature. And again, just make sure you are answering every question that they put to you in any of the prompts. So for your CV, you have 2 pages. And I will address 2 different groups of students here. We tend to get a lot of people who have maybe a 6 or 7 page CV that have to trim it down to 2 pages. And they tend to force too much on 1 page. Make sure it's legible, make sure it's easy to read, make sure you're listing off experiences, not just subheadings. And also we have kind of the other side of the coin where people are handing in 1 page CVs. You have 2 pages, use it. Like I said, everything is based off of your paper submission. So you really want to take advantage of any space they give you, but in a way that's, again, easy to follow. And you can go through and see the evaluation criteria, everything like that for all the parts of this application. So I'm not going to read through them, but when we get to the personal education and career development response, this is where most of your points are coming from. So really do pay attention to this. Each section has a different word count. It's not a strict word count, but they're pretty particular about it. Overall, it should be about 1,500 words. When you go through and you look at the prompts, again, just make sure you're touching on every part of the question, because when reviewers come through and read these applications, the only thing they have to kind of take away points on is, student failed to address a leadership role, or student failed to address overcoming a challenge. So please make sure you have everything in there. Again, don't repeat what's on your CV unless you're further fleshing out a story. Try to give us more of an insight into you. Overall, you only get about 5 pages. So try not to repeat or kind of harp on any one experience. The relevant coursework and future year plans. Of course, if you're still enrolled in school, let us know when you're graduating. Make sure if you are going to still be enrolled that you're letting us know the plans to get up to DC and finish, or if you still have to defend, that's fine. Make a note that your advisor is aware of this, and it's fine. Also, if you're going to be working any jobs in between the time where you're going to be graduating and the time where the fellowship would be starting, let us know. But also use this space. You have a page, single spaced, and you don't need that whole page just to talk about the classes you're going to take. So feel free to use this space to elaborate a little if you can work it in. So that's there. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. Your letters of recommendation. I'm going to just talk about these quickly, but they are only worth 5 points, but a lot of times the difference between people who get selected and don't is not more than 1 or 2 points in the review. And it's really important that you pick letter writers that know you well enough to answer the prompts. And again, the prompts are listed right there in the NOFO, so take a look at them and really take your time to consider who your second letter writer should be, and even your first one, your academic referral. Make sure it's someone who knows enough about you to write the letter. And maybe that means you have to take them out for coffee and go through a few stories and make sure they know what to say, and that make sure they know there are prompts and that they're not just writing a standard recommendation letter, because they're going to lose points for not answering the specific questions. Make sure you give them enough time too. So you're going to go onto EC Grant and there'll be a submit a request for a letter of recommendation button there. If you have any issues with EC Grant, please just give us a call or shoot us an email. Give them enough time to write a decent letter. Don't send this out on February 2nd and be like, by the way, I need this next week, thanks. Try to give them enough time and just offer to email them, or like I said, grab a coffee and kind of talk, especially for your professional recommendation. If it's not someone you've spoken to in a few years, make sure those stories are fresh in their head. Transcripts, these are not graded. So they can be unofficial transcripts. You do have to hand them in though. So don't worry if you're like, oh, I have that one kind of fuzzy grade. No one's really looking at it as far as the graders go, but you do have to submit them. And the out-of-state letter, that should not be relevant to anybody here right now, but if there is anybody here from DC, just let me know afterwards, because I think you're going to Maryland this year. And you will have to get a letter from Nationals just saying that you're a DC student looking to submit for Knauss, and they'll let you know which program's doing that this year. Again, that's not scored. It's just so Nationals can keep track of who's applying. The director's letter is not something you guys have to worry about. That is submitted by the program. And what happens is during the state review, we'll do interviews, and they're kind of get to know you interviews to help us select finalists, but also to help us get enough information to write this director's letter. So when you do get to your interview phase, you'll notice that it's not really a job interview so much as we're trying to pick at different experiences that are listed maybe that haven't been fleshed out entirely, and get a fuller story so that we can write something about you that makes you stand out in the director's letter. So this is your point breakdown. As you notice, the relevant experience, the personal education, career development response, that's the main chunk of your points. So you really want to make sure you're answering the questions and paying attention and editing and everything like that. Don't forget, at the end, there's an overall cohesion, 10 points. And it just makes, like, at some point, put it down, walk away, come back a few days later and read it start to finish. Because that's so when a lot of the Sea Grant staff grades these or reviews them, I should say. And that's what we're doing. We're reading your whole packet front to back. So read it through, make sure it makes sense start to finish, make sure it flows in some capacity, and try to keep it non-repetitive and inclusive. All right, so the review process, I think I've touched on this a little bit, but first it goes to a state level review. Everybody will put their applications into Virginia Sea Grant by February 15th on EC Grant. And we will do an internal paper review followed by interviews. And then our 6 finalists from Virginia will be sent up for the national review. That's entirely paper. Everything they look at is just your paperwork. So even if you have a really great interview with us, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll move you forward, because we have to consider that everything that's being looked at is in that application packet. So keep that in mind, give yourself plenty of time, have some people read over your submissions before you turn it in. And on that topic, I'm going to get a little bit off the slides for a moment. We have an alumni mentor program where we can partner you guys up with one of our past Knauss alumni. And they will volunteer to go through your paperwork once it's written out and give it a once over and just say, hey, look, I don't think you answered the questions. I've given them all the evaluation criteria. So they should be able to look at it from kind of an outsider's point of view and say, well, this is what I would change, or this is what I think you need to work on. So I would just ask everybody here that if you do want to be part of our alumni mentor program, either put your name and email in the chat or send me an email, preferably by next Friday, and we'll make sure you get paired up with a mentor. And that way, if you have any questions about the Knauss Fellowship in general, or you need somebody to look at your application materials, you have somebody there who's familiar with the program who can do that for you. So we'll get to that a little bit more in a second on the questions slide, but I wanted to touch on it before I forgot. Application tips. We will connect you with an alumni. I just said that. Like I said, reread it, put it down for a few days. You have plenty of time. The letters of rec, give them time, give them stories. Don't forget to grab your transcripts. People tend to forget about them because they're not being graded. It's not the thing that's forefront on your mind. Just make sure they're in the packet. And again, proofread. Everything that National does review-wise is based on that application packet. So make sure you've put the time into it. And that's pretty much my quick overview. And I know it's a lot. Knauss is a lot of information, but I'd like to open it up to questions because all of that information is located in the NOFO, which you can find the link either on our website or National's website.
I posted the links in the chat as well. And we do have at least one question so far to get us going. And the question is, do you have suggestions for applicants to better show their interest whose background doesn't have a direct link to water resources?
So obviously the application only requires you have an interest in coastal and marine resources, but your application will be stronger if you have some experience doing this. And this works the other way as well. For science students, they're going to want to see a little bit of policy experience, or at least an interest, taking a class, doing something that has to do with policy. And for policy and legal students, they're going to want to see some interest in coastal and marine prior to the submission. So if that is not the case and there's maybe limited to draw from, perhaps you can draw on some personal experiences in your career development narrative that kind of show where your interests line with the coasts and with marine issues. I would just do your best to kind of work in whatever you have.
Okay, so we've got a few people who have put in the chat their names and their emails who are interested in being a part of the mentoring. So I'm making note of those. And we also have a question. How many state finalists are typically selected as national finalists?
So it does vary from year to year. Last year, we did quite well. We have 5 finalists that were selected for the national finalist pool and 1 that turned it down. Sorry, 1 that was a runner-up and then was eventually moved up. So we have 5 total Knauss fellows coming out of Virginia for last year. Other years it's 2 to 3. It really depends on how many positions they have. So last year there were 84 positions open. The year before there were not that many. So it does greatly vary on how many applicants they get and how many positions there are. But I would say on average 2, maybe 3.
Nice. Okay, and so, all right, great. Yeah, putting in the chat if you are also an international student helps. That's great. And it looks like Hannah might have a question.
Go ahead, Anna. You don't have to.
Hi. Thank you for that presentation. It was super useful. I had a question about the executive versus legislature placing. Is that done? Do you indicate that in your application, or is that something that happens after you're selected? And do you have any tips on how to weigh the pros and cons on choosing one?
Okay, so just so you know, out of the 80 positions that they had last year, I think 14 of them were legislative. Don't quote me on the number, but it's greatly weighed towards executive. It's not something that you put in your application packet. If you are selected as a national finalist, They will put out a call asking you which you'd like to be a part of. And at that point, you would have to submit, if it's not executive, you have to submit just a little paragraph explaining why you want to be legislative, and they review those and pick as many people as they have positions for the legislative side. As far as placement goes, if you are an executive fellow, they place you in October of the year before you start. If you're legislative, you don't find out where you're going to sit until January because of elections and stuff. So as far as pros and cons, it really depends on where you want to go. It's always nice to kind of look through host offices from previous years and have, if you do want to be a legislative fellow, have some executive backups, because just probability speaking, there really aren't that many legislative appointment positions.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
In your packet, that'll be addressed after you're a finalist. Thanks, Hannah.
And we have a question in the chat. Could you share more about housing? Are we responsible for finding housing, etc.?
Yeah, so you will be responsible for relocating to DC. As I said, you'll be a William and Mary employee, but that will not cover housing. There are that $5,000 discretionary fund. You can use those as relocation reimbursement, but you will be responsible for finding housing. Now, if you do become a finalist at the national level, there are some kind of email chains and stuff where fellows kind of pass down housing or different houses that they've used in the past, both in the Virginia level and at the national level. So at the point where you are selected as a national finalist, we'll make sure you get connected to people in DC who have done this before, that have a better idea of kind of where you want to be and what the housing situation looks like.
And feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you don't want to put it in the chat. If something comes up, you can also email us. I put both our emails in the chat. If you want to copy and paste from there, you're welcome to do that, as well as all the website information for our Sea Grant website, as well as the Knauss page.
And just a note on your applications, once you submit that to EC Grant, once it's submitted to us, we cannot ask you to change it or suggest you change anything or have you change it even on your own. Once it is submitted, that is what we have to forward to nationals, which is unfortunate because sometimes during the course of the interview, we find out there's a lot more that could have been expressed. So please do take advantage of those alumni mentors or ask questions now before you submit it. It's perfectly fine to submit this on February 13th. I mean, it's totally fine to do it kind of last minute if you're taking that time to get it ready. I mean, obviously you don't want to do the day before and make sure your letters are in and everything like that, but take the time, really kind of make sure it's what you want before you submit it to us, because once it's in, we can't change it or have you change it.
I have another question. What are the biggest, most common mistakes or missed opportunities applicants make?
I would think the biggest mistake I've seen is not checking the evaluation criteria and making sure you've answered, like going back and saying, okay, here's the prompt, here's the evaluation criteria. Have I hit everything? They spell it out right on paper for you. It's there and it's a really useful tool. So go right from the prompts, but then make sure, take your own grading page and try to grade your own application and see what you missed. Another thing that people tend to miss is, as I said, they want to see kind of a little bit of policy experience. That doesn't mean you have to have been a different fellow or had some kind of specific training, but find something that relates to public service and policy and find a way to kind of weave it into your application. Even if you don't think it's a really strong policy experience and maybe you think something else you've done is more important, they are going to be looking for that. So don't leave it out just because you think it's not a good policy experience or a strong policy experience. The only other mistake I can think of is kind of having bad organization throughout the career statement, repeating things or like letting the reader kind of get lost as they're going through your application. You want it to read front to back. And I know CVs aren't dreadfully entertaining to read, but make sure there's some experiences in there, even if you have to cut back some headings just to get more kind of meat under each one. Pick the ones that are really related to this experience and this fellowship and make sure you're spelling out a little bit of what you actually did there. Besides, oh, I was this, I was that, I worked here, I worked there. Let us know what you did there and how it relates to Knauss. When you're writing your career experience, make sure you touch on what you want to get out of the Knauss Fellowship. And I know you all want a job offering and a network, and we know that, and we know that's what it's good for. It's great for that, but say more. Find something else besides that to talk about as far as what you're going to bring home from the fellowship while you're telling them about all the skills that you're going to bring to the fellowship.
Think about things like goals or professional growth, where you would like to, where you see yourself using this opportunity, how you might build on this opportunity for future ideas. There's a lot you could say about that. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Would somebody like to unmute and ask a question?
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for the info. And I would like to ask that, so if we prepare all the things that you mentioned, the CV, the letter, and we show it to our mentor, for example, will they be able to help us in a way like to guide us that this letter is appropriate or not?
Yes, so we had a similar webinar last Tuesday with all the interested alumni that were interested in mentoring you guys. And they were given the entire evaluation criteria, all the point scales, and kind of our 2 cents, if you will, on how to help out. And they know that they're supposed to be looking at your application packet and giving you feedback. So make sure what you're handing them is well put together. You know, you don't want to wait till last minute for them. They're busy. So give them enough time to review your packet, but have it at least well thought out and drafted by time you give it to them, so they can really go through and say, hey, this is what you're missing and this is what I would change, or hey, your CV doesn't read very easily, it's too packed, or it's not enough, you've got half an empty page here, fill it up, talk more about this, talk more about that. So yeah, they're willing to help you guys. So you take advantage of that if you can.
And you can ask them questions because they are, as Lisa mentioned, alumni of the program. So if you're curious about what path they took or their experience, you know, they're happy to share some of those ideas as well, which might give you some ideas on what to put in your application as far as what you might get out of it. We do have a couple more questions. Do all applicants receive interviews is one question.
That would depend how many applications we receive. We're going to do an internal paper review, and usually all applicants move on to an interview stage, but if we get too many applications, we will cut it off or limit the number of people who move forward.
Nice. Is there a recommended deadline to send materials to alumni mentors?
I would talk, we're going to try to get the mentorship information, the pairings out next, not Monday coming up, but the Monday after we get kind of everybody organized and make sure everybody has everyone's email. I would talk to each one of them. Some of them are very busy. Most of them are busy, like you guys are. So make sure you guys chat about what timing they're going to need to give you an honest review, but I would try to get them your paperwork by January. Don't like early January. Don't wait till last minute, because the more time you give them, the more help they can be. But no, there's no strong deadline besides anything you guys agree upon.
Nice. All right. Can you give examples of what others have put under relevant coursework and future plans? The description says the student should include a listing of classes and or plans for spring 2024, summer 2024, and fall 2024.
Yes, so you can go beyond that if you'd like. I will put together a couple examples if you guys want, and I can email them out. But really, well,
Can you include internships too, for example?
Yes, internships and jobs definitely get included. Anything that you plan on doing between when you submit the application to us and when the fellowship would start, which would be February of 2025, is relevant and can go on that page. And again, check the criteria for the evaluation criteria for that section. And it will let you know exactly what the graders are going to be looking for. And if you can use some of that space to also improve the cohesion of your whole packet, that would be good as well.
And we have a question, it looks like about timing. Could you share if anyone travels on the weekends back home?
We have had fellows that travel. Obviously, so the fellows come from all 34 Sea Grant programs. So somebody coming from maybe California or Washington State, less so than our Virginia folk. But there is travel on weekends, unless there's something going on with your host office or you're attending a conference. I don't see why you couldn't.
And some of our fellows talk about having schedules that they've set up with their host offices that might be partially remote, partially in person, depending on the host office and what they've set up. So there are different options that the fellows have expressed that they've been able to work with, especially with COVID. Things have kind of changed a little bit with the flexibility in some cases.
Hi, Lisa and Hillary. Thanks for the presentation. I just had a really quick question, kind of continuing on the interview question that was brought up earlier. So, Lisa, you said that interviews will be conducted based on the number of applicants. But early in the presentation, you mentioned that after the interview process, sometimes things come up that might be relevant to the application. So I was just wondering the timing of that. Like, are the interviews before the application deadline? Or they afterwards?
They are afterwards.
Okay.
So the interviews are part of the state review. And like I said, we like to interview everybody. But sometimes the amount of applications, it's just not feasible. So we do a paper review, but I was answering that question as far as things coming up during the interview that aren't included in the packet as one of the mistakes people make. Sometimes we'll get into an interview and there's this wealth of experience that's just not properly documented through the application process. And it's a shame because it'll never get, there's no interview in the national review. They're just basing it on your application package. So anything you want them to read has to be in there when you submit it to us. And that's one of the other reasons we pair you guys up with a mentor, an alumni mentor, so they can talk to you a little bit more and you can flesh out some of those stories that would hopefully come up during the interview as well. Now, if it's just one or two stories, if you remember, we are putting together the information for that director's letter and we can work that in on our side. You know, if there's a gap or something to explain or something that was left out, we can talk about that in our director's letter. But if there's just this experience that is crucial to the application and it's missing at the point where we do our interviews, it is too late for us to have your package modified.
Gotcha. Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we got another question. If there are several host offices you are interested in, is it best to have your application more specific to the goals of those offices or to take a more general approach?
So it is always better to take a more general approach. We never know which host offices will be participating. And during the host office selection week, you may wind up interviewing with 15 different host offices, some of which you never even considered working for, but hey, that project sounded really cool. And you know, why not interview? It's all virtual. So you can do kind of as many as you'd like. So I would say keep it general and remember, like, people who are grading or reviewing your application, it's people like me, but from a different state. So I don't know where you want to wind up. So I'm reading it from the consideration of, would they make a good Knauss fellow? Have they answered all the questions? And if you waste some of that space talking about specific host office qualifications, it might take away. Now, if there is an experience that may lend itself to a particular host office, but is generically related to Knauss, please feel free to put it in. Don't keep it out just because you think it aligns with one more than the other. But I would not doctor your application package to one particular or two particular host offices.
Other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. You're welcome. Thank you for the good questions.
Hi, this is Robin.
Hi.
Hi, so I was wondering if we have that we're committed to some research for a few years, is that something we're allowed to continue? Do you have to have your calendar totally free during this? Or if you were, for instance, teaching an online course at a university, would that be acceptable?
So as far as other work goes, the application only requires that you be eligible as far as being enrolled in a graduate program right now. It does not necessarily state you can't be doing anything else during the Knauss Fellowship period. I would make sure that you spelled out during your relevant coursework and future plans, whatever they're calling that this year. The future plan section, make sure you're putting in there, hey, currently I'm doing research here. They're aware I'm applying for this. They understand it's a full-time job, either going to have flexibility, or I don't see that there's any reason I can't continue to do both. And just make sure they're aware of it. If it's going to be something that's listed on your CV as something you're doing to present, and it's going to continue, make sure you let them know that it won't interfere with the Knauss Fellowship, because it is a full-time job in DC for that year-long period. So they're going to want to see that you can commit to it.
Thank you.
Good questions. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
And I can put these slides and both that and the recording of this webinar up on our website. And there's also some information on the Nationals website that's linked there. Take the time, read the NOFO. But if you have any questions, please just email us. We're here.
We're happy to help answer questions. Again, you have our emails, and if you would like to mentor and if you'd like to be a part of the mentorship and have a mentor assigned to you, either put your name and email in the chat, or you can email us the information. Also, let us know if you are an international student, or any other questions that you might have. Feel free to email.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody. Let us know if you have any questions.
You're welcome. Have a good one, guys.